The blood-red sunset stretched across the Arizona sky as Nora Hayes pressed herself deeper into the shadowy corner of the saloon, her slender fingers clutching a locket that contained the only remnant of the life she'd left behind. It was 1878, and Copper Creek was just another dusty frontier town where she hoped to disappear from her past, from herself, and most importantly, from the men who had taken everything from her. The saloon bustled with the usual evening crowd, miners with dirt-stained faces, cattle drivers with sweat-soaked shirts, and the occasional well-dressed businessman passing through town. Nora had been watching them for 3 nights now, never speaking, barely drinking the single glass of whiskey she ordered to justify her presence. The barkeep had stopped asking questions after the first night, seeming to understand that some stories were better left untold. Across the room, a tall man entered, ducking slightly under the doorframe. His brown Stetson was weathered from years under the relentless western sun, and his face bore the hardened look of someone who had seen his fair share of trouble. When he removed his hat, revealing thick, honey-brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, several heads turned in his direction. Hunter Hayes, no relation to Nora despite the shared surname, had a reputation that preceded him. Not as an outlaw or a gunslinger, but as a man who kept his word and his cattle healthy, a combination that made him both respected and successful in a territory where either quality alone was rare. Mr. Hayes, the barkeep called out with genuine warmth. The usual? Hunter nodded, taking a seat at the bar. Thanks, Frank. Been a long day. Nora shifted uncomfortably. She'd chosen this corner specifically because it afforded her a view of both entrances while keeping her face in shadow. The last thing she needed was attention, especially from a man who likely had connections throughout the territory. Heard you lost some cattle to rustlers last week, Frank said, sliding a glass of amber liquid toward Hunter. Hunter's jaw tightened. 5 of my best. Sheriff's tracking them, but... He shrugged, the gesture conveying more resignation than hope. The conversation drifted to local matters: water rights, the delayed supply train, rumors of a patchy movement to the south. Nora found herself listening despite her determination to remain detached. There was something in Hunter's voice, a combination of strength and thoughtfulness, that made his words carry across the noisy room. As the night progressed, the saloon grew more raucous. A poker game in the corner turned heated when a miner accused a cattle driver of cheating. Nora tensed as voices raised and chairs scraped back. Violence had a way of spreading like wildfire, and she had no desire to be caught in the blaze. Just as she prepared to slip out, the miner lunged across the table. The ensuing scuffle sent bodies tumbling into her corner, knocking over her table. Nora tried to flatten herself against the wall, but a flailing arm caught her shoulder, spinning her into the light. Hey! Hunter's voice cut through the chaos. He had moved with surprising speed for a man his size, inserting himself between the brawlers and Nora. Take it outside or settle it peaceful-like. There's a lady present. The fighters paused, suddenly aware of Nora. Her hood had fallen back, revealing her face pale, with high cheekbones and striking green eyes that now widened in alarm at being the center of attention. I'm no lady, she said quickly, desperate to deflect interest. And I was just leaving. Hunter studied her face, his expression shifting from protectiveness to curiosity. At least let me see you safely to your lodgings, Mississippi. That won't be necessary. Nora pulled her cloak tighter and tried to step around him. Hunter didn't move to stop her, but his voice followed her to the door. It's not safe for anyone to walk alone at night, especially with rustlers about. Nora hesitated at the threshold, aware of the eyes on her back. The night outside was dark, the moon obscured by clouds. She had a small room at the boarding house 2 streets over, but the shadows between here and there suddenly seemed deeper than before. I can manage, she said, not turning around. Hunter appeared beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. I'm headed that direction myself. No obligation to converse. Something in his tone, the lack of demand, the simple offer of security, without expectation, made Nora relent. "Very well, Mr. Hayes." They walked in silence through the quiet streets. Nora kept her face partially hidden by her hood, aware of Hunter's occasional glance in her direction. When they reached the boarding house, she paused at the steps. "Thank you," she said stiffly. Hunter nodded, replacing his hat. "Miss Hayes, isn't it?" Nora, startled. "How did you—" "I saw the name in the register when I delivered a package to Mrs. Wilkins yesterday." He smiled slightly at her suspicious expression. "Small town. And an uncommon coincidence that we share a name." "We're not related," Nora said quickly. "Didn't imagine we were." Hunter's blue eyes held hers for a moment. "Good night, Miss Hayes. Perhaps next time you visit the saloon, you might consider a table with better lighting. Shadows tend to draw more attention than they deflect in a place like that." Before Nora could respond, he tipped his hat and walked away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Nora slept poorly that night, dreams of her past mingling with the unfamiliar sensation of being seen, truly seen for the first time in months. Hunter Hayes represented exactly what she was avoiding: connection, recognition, the possibility of questions she couldn't answer. The next morning, Nora rose early, determined to avoid another encounter. She had enough money saved to last another week, maybe two if she was careful. Then she would move on, as she had been doing since leaving Boston 6 months ago. She had just finished pinning her dark hair into a severe bun when a knock sounded at her door. Cautiously, she opened it to find Mrs. Wilkins, the boarding house proprietor, standing there with a small package. "This came for you, dear," the older woman said, her kind face creased with curiosity. "From Mr. Hayes." Nora accepted the package with numb fingers. "Thank you," she managed, closing the door before Mrs. Wilkins could ask the questions clearly forming on her lips. The package contained a small knife in a leather sheath, along with a note. "Miss Hayes, a lady traveling alone should have protection. This belonged to my sister before she married and moved east. It's small enough to conceal but sharp enough to discourage unwanted attention. No obligation to accept, of course. Hunter Hayes." Nora ran her finger along the knife's handle, carved with a delicate pattern of wildflowers. The blade was indeed sharp, professionally maintained. It was a thoughtful gift, practical rather than presumptuous. She spent the day debating whether to return it. Accepting felt like acknowledging a connection. Refusing felt ungrateful after his intervention the previous night. By evening, she had settled on a compromise. She would thank him properly, explain her imminent departure, and offer to purchase the knife rather than accept it as a gift. Finding Hunter proved easier than expected. The stable master directed her to a modest ranch a mile outside town. As Nora approached on foot, the setting sun cast long shadows across a well-maintained house, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. A dog barked, announcing her arrival before she reached the gate. Hunter emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. Recognition followed by surprise crossed his face as he approached. "Miss Hayes," he said, removing his hat. "I didn't expect a personal visit." Nora straightened her shoulders. "I wanted to return this properly." She extended the package. "It's a generous offer, but I can't accept such a gift." Hunter made no move to take it. "It's not sitting in a drawer doing any good. My sister would approve of it finding purpose again." "Then let me pay you for it." Nora reached for her purse. Hunter shook his head. "It wasn't offered for sale." He gestured toward the house. "Would you care for some coffee? It's fresh made." Nora hesitated. She had planned a quick exchange, not a social call. But the walk had been longer than expected, and her throat was dry from the dusty road. "Just coffee," she conceded. The interior of Hunter's home surprised her. It was clean and comfortably furnished, with bookshelves lining one wall and landscape paintings hanging on another. A pot bubbled on the stove, filling the room with the rich aroma of coffee. "You have quite a collection," Nora said, unable to hide her interest in the books. Hunter poured 2 cups of coffee. "Reading passes the winter evenings. Do you have a preference for fiction or history?" "Both," Nora admitted, accepting the cup. "Though I left my books behind when I began traveling." Hunter didn't press for details, instead discussing a recent historical account of the Mexican War he'd been reading. Nora found herself drawn into the conversation, offering her own perspectives based on books she'd read years ago in her father's library. As darkness fell, Hunter lit lamps around the room. The warm glow created an atmosphere of intimacy that made Nora suddenly aware of the impropriety of her situation alone in a man's home, miles from town, with night falling. "I should return before it's fully dark," she said, setting down her empty cup. Hunter nodded. "Let me saddle a horse for you. It's too far to walk back now." "I couldn't possibly. You can return her tomorrow," Hunter said firmly. "I won't have you walking those roads at night." The practicality of his argument overrode Nora's objections. Soon she found herself atop a gentle mare named Daisy, with Hunter providing basic riding instructions. His hands were warm and steady as he adjusted her posture, professional in their guidance, but leaving an unfamiliar sensation in their wake. "Thank you," Nora said as they reached the gate. "For the coffee. And the knife." She had tucked it into her pocket, acceptance easier than continued refusal. Hunter smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "You're welcome, Miss Hayes. Perhaps next time you'll tell me what brings a Boston-educated lady to hide in the shadows of Copper Creek." Nora stiffened. "My accent. That and your discussion of Hawthorne suggested more than passing familiarity with New England literature." His eyes held no judgment, only interest. Nora clicked her tongue, urging Daisy forward. "Good night, Mr. Hayes." His chuckle followed her down the road, somehow both irritating and warming. Over the next week, Nora found herself drawn into Hunter's orbit despite her intentions to maintain distance. She returned Daisy as promised, only to be invited to stay for lunch. When she mentioned needing work to extend her stay in Copper Creek, Hunter introduced her to the town's schoolteacher, who needed assistance with the growing number of students. The temporary position suited Nora's skills and provided enough income to justify remaining in town a bit longer. She told herself it was practical to establish a small reserve of funds before moving on. It had nothing to do with Hunter's invitation to Sunday dinner, or the way the children's eager faces lit up when she read to them, or how, for the first time in months, she slept without nightmares. As spring progressed into early summer, Nora's walls began to lower slightly, cautiously. She accepted more invitations to Hunter's ranch, sometimes bringing books from the school to discuss, other times simply enjoying quiet meals and conversation on his porch as the sun set. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, his journey west after the war, and his steady building of the ranch through hard work rather than luck. In turn, she shared carefully edited stories of her life in Boston, her education, her love of literature. Hunter never pushed when she diverted conversations away from her family or her reasons for traveling west, but his eyes told her he was piecing together the fragments she revealed. One evening in late June, they rode together along the creek that gave the town its name. The air was heavy with the scent of wildflowers, and birds called to each other in the cottonwoods overhead. Hunter had been unusually quiet, and Nora found herself filling the silence with observations about the landscape. "You're settling in well," Hunter finally said, guiding his horse alongside hers. "Mrs. Thompson says you've become indispensable at the school." Nora adjusted her grip on the reins. "The children are bright. It's rewarding to work with them. Will you stay through the fall term, then?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Nora had been in Copper Creek for nearly 3 months, far longer than she'd stayed anywhere since leaving Boston. "I haven't decided," she said carefully. Hunter nodded, his expression thoughtful. Nora, I've respected your privacy, but I need to ask something now. Her heart quickened. Yes. Are you running from the law? The question was so unexpected that Nora laughed, the sound startling in the quiet evening.
No.
Nothing like that. Relief softened Hunter's features. A husband, then? The laughter died in her throat.
No.
But someone is looking for you, he pressed gently. Someone you fear. Nora stared at the creek, watching sunlight dance across its surface. The weight of secrets pressed on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Hunter waited, patient as always, giving her space to find words or change the subject. My father died last year, she finally said, her voice barely audible above the water's murmur. He left everything to me, his shipping business, properties, investments. My cousin Frederick was displeased. He expected to inherit. Hunter's expression darkened. Did he threaten you? Not directly. Not at first. Nora swallowed hard. There was an accident at one of the warehouses. A fire. A night watchman died. And you believe your cousin was responsible? Nora nodded. I found evidence. When I confronted him, She touched her wrist unconsciously, where a thin scar remained from that night. He made it clear that accidents could happen to anyone. Hunter's hand tightened on his saddle horn. Did you go to the authorities? Frederick's connections include the police commissioner and 2 judges. Bitterness colored her voice. I tried. The evidence disappeared from the station before it could be properly recorded. So you ran. I left everything in my lawyer's hands and disappeared. Nora met Hunter's gaze directly. I've been moving west ever since, never staying long enough to be found. I have money hidden in various banks under different names, but eventually I'll need to establish myself somewhere new, permanently. Hunter was silent for a long moment. Then he reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against her fingers. Stay in Copper Creek, he said simply. Nora shook her head. If Frederick finds me, then he'll have to deal with me and the community you've built here. Hunter's voice was calm but resolute. You don't have to face this alone, Nora. The sincerity in his eyes pierced something long frozen inside her. For months, she had carried her fear alone, trusting no one, allowing no attachments. Now, sitting beside a sun-dappled creek with a man who had never pushed but always supported, Nora felt the first tentative stirrings of hope. I'll think about it, she promised. Hunter smiled, squeezing her hand before releasing it. That's all I ask. As they rode back to town, something shifted between them, a deepening of trust, a recognition of feelings that had been growing since that first night in the saloon's shadows. Nora found herself watching Hunter's profile against the sunset, noting the strength in his jaw, the kindness in his eyes, the way his presence made her feel both protected and respected. That night, alone in her boarding house room, Nora made a decision. She would stay in Copper Creek, at least until the school term ended. She would write to her lawyer, seeking updates on Frederick's activities. And she would allow herself to explore the possibility that Hunter Hayes represented not just safety, but a future where she wasn't alone. The summer months passed in a haze of golden days and star-filled nights. Nora's role at the school expanded as Mrs. Thompson's arthritis worsened. The children adored Miss Hayes, bringing her wildflowers and interesting rocks, competing for her approval with their arithmetic and penmanship. Her relationship with Hunter evolved gradually, publicly maintaining propriety while privately growing more intimate in conversation and shared dreams. They rode together on Sundays, dined together several evenings each week, and exchanged books with notes written in the margins. Townspeople exchanged knowing glances when they were seen together, but no one questioned the obvious connection between the rancher and the schoolteacher. In August, Hunter invited Nora to accompany him to the territorial capital for a livestock auction. The trip would take several days, requiring them to travel with his ranch foreman and wife as chaperones. Nora agreed, both excited for the adventure and nervous about being farther from her established escape routes. The journey proved transformative. Away from Copper Creek, with its familiar routines and watchful eyes, Nora and Hunter found new freedom to express their growing feelings. One evening, while their companions were occupied with auction preparations, they walked through a public garden, Hunter's hand warm around hers. "I've been thinking about expanding the ranch," Hunter said as they paused beside a fountain. "There's good land available to the north, with water rights already established." Nora nodded, admiring the way moonlight played across the water. "It sounds like a sound investment. It would mean building a larger house." Hunter turned to face her, his expression serious. A family home. The implication hung in the air between them. Nora's heart pounded as Hunter took both her hands in his. "Nora Hayes, these past months have been the happiest of my life. I know you came to Copper Creek running from something, but I'm hoping you've found something worth staying for." His voice deepened with emotion. "I love you. I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me." Tears blurred Nora's vision as emotions she'd kept controlled for so long broke free. "Hunter, a voice called from behind them, interrupting the moment. "Mr. Hayes. Telegram for you, sir." Hunter reluctantly released one of Nora's hands to accept the yellow paper. As he read it, his expression darkened. "What is it?" Nora asked, anxiety replacing joy. "Trouble at the ranch. Rustlers hit again. Took a dozen head." Hunter folded the telegram. "We need to return tomorrow." The journey back to Copper Creek was tense, the proposal left hanging between them as more urgent matters took precedence. When they arrived, they found the ranch in disarray, fences cut, a stable hand injured, and the local sheriff tracking the stolen cattle. "Same gang as before," the sheriff reported grimly. "They're getting bolder." Hunter threw himself into reorganizing the ranch's security, leaving Nora to return to town and her teaching duties. Days passed with only brief conversations as Hunter rode out with posses or met with neighboring ranchers to coordinate defenses. Nora understood the necessity, but couldn't help feeling that their moment had passed, that perhaps it was a sign she shouldn't put down roots after all. When a letter arrived from her lawyer reporting that Frederick had been making inquiries in Colorado territory, her resolve wavered further. One evening in late September, as Nora sat alone on the boarding house porch contemplating her options, a rider approached at speed. It was one of Hunter's ranch hands, his face grim. "Miss Hayes, you're needed at the ranch. Mr. Hayes has been shot." The world tilted beneath Nora's feet. "Is he alive, madam, but asking for you? Doc's with him now." The ride to the ranch passed in a blur of fear and prayer. When they arrived, the doctor was just leaving Hunter's bedroom. "Clean through the shoulder," the elderly physician reported. "He'll recover if infection doesn't set in. Keep him still, change the bandages twice daily, and send for me if fever develops." Nora entered the bedroom with trepidation. Hunter lay pale against the pillows, his left shoulder heavily bandaged. His eyes opened when she approached, relief washing over his features. "You came," he whispered. Nora sat beside the bed, taking his right hand in both of hers. "Of course I came. What happened?" "Caught the rustlers red-handed." Hunter winced as he shifted slightly. "They weren't expecting resistance. Got one of them. The others fled." "You could have been killed," Nora said, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Hunter's fingers tightened around hers. "But I wasn't. And now I have the best nurse in the territory." Over the next 2 weeks, Nora divided her time between the school and Hunter's bedside. She moved temporarily into the ranch's guest room, propriety maintained by the constant presence of the foreman's wife. As Hunter regained strength, their conversations resumed, deeper now in the face of what might have been lost. "I never answered your question," Nora said one evening as she changed Hunter's bandages. "In the capital, when you were interrupted." Hunter's eyes met hers. I figured the timing wasn't right. It wasn't the timing that gave me pause. Nora's fingers stilled on the fresh bandage. It was fear. Not of you, but of allowing myself to hope for a future when my past is still unresolved. Hunter covered her hand with his. Some things are worth the risk, Nora. She looked at him, this man who had pulled her from the shadows both literally and figuratively, who had offered protection without possession, strength without domination. Yes, she said simply. They are. The kiss they shared sealed more than a promise. It marked the end of Nora's solitary journey and the beginning of a shared path. They were married in October, a small ceremony in the town church with the entire community in attendance. Nora wore a dress of pale blue silk that Hunter had ordered from San Francisco and carried wildflowers gathered by her students. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers from the congregation nearly lifted the roof. Life settled into a rhythm of shared work and shared joy. Nora continued teaching while helping Hunter manage the ranch's books. They expanded the house as planned, adding rooms with large windows that banished shadows and welcomed light. Hunter's library grew as Nora's collection of books from her Boston life was gradually shipped west. In December, Nora received news that changed everything. Frederick had been arrested for fraud and embezzlement. His desperate attempts to maintain control of what should have been his inheritance had led to increasingly reckless financial manipulations. With his political connections distancing themselves to avoid scandal, there was no one to intervene when the evidence mounted. It's over, Nora told Hunter that night, the letter trembling in her hands. I don't have to hide anymore. Hunter pulled her close. Will you want to return east? Reclaim your properties? Nora shook her head, burying her face against his chest. My home is here now, with you. As winter gave way to spring, Nora discovered another change, the first fluttering movements of new life within her. When she told Hunter, his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. A child, he whispered, placing his hand reverently on her still, flat stomach. Our child. The pregnancy progressed well, with Nora glowing under Hunter's attentive care. She reluctantly gave up teaching as her condition became more pronounced, focusing instead on preparing the nursery and expanding the ranch's kitchen garden. On a warm evening in late summer, almost exactly a year after Hunter had proposed, Nora sat on their porch watching the sunset. Hunter joined her, bringing a quilt to wrap around her shoulders against the cooling air. Penny for your thoughts, he said, settling beside her. Nora smiled, placing his hand over the swell of their child. I was thinking about shadows. Shadows. Hunter raised an eyebrow. When you found me in that saloon, I was hiding in shadows, convinced they were safer than the light. She leaned against him. I never imagined that stepping into the light would lead to this, to you, to our home, to our child. Hunter kissed her temple. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is leave the shadows behind. As if in agreement, their baby kicked against Hunter's palm. They laughed together, heads touching, hands entwined over the promise of their future. When their daughter was born in November, healthy and strong, with Hunter's blue eyes and Nora's dark hair, they named her Lillian, after Hunter's mother. The name meant lily, a flower that reaches from darkness toward the light. As the years passed, Lillian was joined by 2 brothers and another sister. The Hayes Ranch prospered, becoming one of the largest and most respected in the territory. Nora eventually returned to teaching, establishing a school on their property that served both their children and those of neighboring ranches. On their 20th anniversary, Hunter presented Nora with a special gift, a locket to replace the one she had carried when she first arrived in Copper Creek. The new locket contained miniature portraits of their family on one side and, on the other, an inscription, "From shadows to light, from solitude to love. Forever yours, H." Looking at her husband, his hair now threaded with silver, but his eyes still bright with the same devotion that had sustained them through 2 decades, Nora felt a completeness she had once thought impossible. "I love you, Hunter Hayes," she said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. "And I love you, Nora Hayes," he replied, his arms strong and sure around her. "Always have, from the moment I pulled you out of those shadows." Together they watched the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, standing in the light they had chosen, surrounded by the life they had built, their shadows merging into one.